Okay, so let's go ahead and finish up this idea of stream restoration. Definitely important because we need to figure out how do we restore stream beds, because then the streams carry the water from the watershed to the rivers to the lakes and so on, but we want to do it where we can decrease sediment and nutrient runoff. In the previous picture, think about what they did here with all this vegetation. That decreases sediment getting carried into the stream and the nutrients as well. So buffer strips are incredibly important when we put those along the edges of waterways, because erosion, runoff, whether it's just sediment or nutrients, gets trapped in the buffer strips. The challenge is, especially in the agricultural world and other areas as well, we need to, okay, we're going to go right up to the edge of that waterway with our development, with our mowed lawn, with our crops. Think about what they do at Lincoln Land. There's mowed grass right to the edge of that pond. So any of the fertilizer being used can run off right into the pond. There's no buffer. The challenge is a lot of people don't like the look of buffers. They're not aesthetic. They're not pretty. They don't look nice, because they're looking for aesthetics versus environmentally beneficial or environmentally good things. That is a big challenge when we're dealing with restoration, is convincing people sometimes aesthetics are not the priority. It should be functionality and the value and benefit here of having a good stream. So, okay, so when we're looking at it, to do stream work, we need to look at the watershed. That's that bigger area of land surrounding the body of water. And what do we do with all that? It's recommended between a 66 to 99 foot buffer strip of vegetation to protect the water quality. Let me make this smaller. So ideally, go from the edge of your stream, 66 to 100. I mean, the bigger the better, but about 100 feet out to protect the water quality. Can you get that done? And then when you're doing the buffer strip, plant it. Ooh. Native. Notice native perennial plants. So we don't want stuff that's going to die off and rot out. That's what we call the herbaceous stuff. We want perennials, woody plants. So if you take a look at this aerial shot of this stream here, this is beautiful. Nice big buffer. There's your waterway. And down the entire length of the waterway, they have a nice thick buffer. They even went further up here and did another bigger buffer back here. I covered it up, but that's a tree right there. So based on this aerial view, the assumption, the water, this is a watershed. The water is going to flow in here because of the elevation of the ground or the topography, and the water is going to go like this. That's why they left this with vegetation, but nice thick buffer strip here. Same thing on this other side of the river or stream. Nice big thick vegetation inside those red lines. It looks like there's a lot of trees back here. That is beautiful. Yes, you sacrifice tillable ground. Everything next to it, this is all tillable in here. Did they lose several acres of ground? Yes. But is it going to make that water cleaner? Is it going to keep the water protected? Absolutely. Those are the things that are critical when we take a look at stream bank restoration. Now you go to the picture on the right, what are you doing? There's very little vegetation. The field is right there. It's literally several feet away from the edge of the water. So anytime we get a heavy rain, erosion, that just runs right off and starts eroding and destroying the stream bank, destabilizing it, and polluting the water. So two completely different perspectives here. Ideally, the one on the right gets restored. You put a buffer strip so many feet out, Could you do it 60, 100, 150, whatever feet wide? It's going to improve the water quality of that stream immensely. It's also going to prevent erosion of the field edge and loss of soil and the actual field edge that will occur every time that stream gets higher velocity of water due to heavy spring rains. So we want to put these pieces into the equation when we're looking at watershed restoration, stream restoration, marsh restoration, etc. All right, now let's touch base briefly about polluted sites. So if you identify your site as having toxins, pollutants, that list is big. What do we do with that? Well, we've got a couple options. Bioremediation is where, I don't want to erase it all. Bioremediation is where we use living organisms to remove pollutants. Now, these living organisms can vary. Sometimes we will use bacteria to suck up pollutants. Sometimes we'll use plants, like these willow trees. They're going to pull out pollutants. They're going to eliminate different toxins from the soil. Sunflowers over there can pull out different pollutants and toxins from the soil. So, but you have to understand what the pollutants are and then which organism can be used to remove that pollutant. Now, when we do plants specifically, it's kind of a smaller subfield of bioremediation. It's called phytoremediation. And this is when you're using plants to remove pollutants. So bioremediation is the broad category of using living organisms to remove pollutants. Phytoremediation is a specific type of bioremediation. So let me actually move that over. That's like the subcategory of bioremediation. All right, so different ways to detoxify sites to try to get rid of pollutants when we're dealing with the restoration ideas. And remember, this is part of remediation here. Remediation is removing the pollutants. If it's severely polluted, then we get into reclamation. But that may go beyond just using living organisms to pull out pollutants. That may be, we gotta go to a next level to get rid of the pollutants. So, all right, and the last thing to touch base on is reclamation. With reclamation, we are using physical or chemical methods to clean up and repair polluted sites. Okay, so that's the idea behind reclamation. Physical, chemical methods to clean up and repair polluted or damaged sites. So this may involve removing some of the soil, going in and actually scooping out soil that is full of pollutants and toxins. Do we use other chemical methods to break down a pollutant and toxin to detoxify it? That's reclamation idea. All right, so big picture. When we're doing restoration, let me put a couple little important asterisks here for us. All right, so let's go with some red because that means really, really important stuff. This is what you'll really want to focus on when we're doing restoration write-ups. All right, so start with historical knowledge of what the site was. Was it a prairie? Was it a deciduous forest? Was it a wetland? Was it a river, et cetera, et cetera? What's the history, historical knowledge of that site? How long ago was it that site? That's a big picture. If it's been altered for the last 200 years, you may have to go about this differently than if it just got converted 10 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 or something like that. The longer it's been altered, the harder it is to get it back to what it used to be. So we do need to know that history. Let's do a site assessment. How much has this changed from the original? Is it still 50% of what it used to be? 20%? The extent of change, again, plays a big role here. If I am 90% changed, that's a lot of restoration versus, well, we've only degraded by 10%. So you need that habitat analysis. You need to look at the species diversity. You need to get all this data to within that site assessment to then put together your action plan. What are you going to do? What is the step or steps necessary to get this back to what we want it to be like? And that's where we go back to the elements. Let me zoom back up briefly. That's where we go back to these elements of the restoration plan. This is part of that assessment and that action plan. So here's all the action plan stuff. Remove the stressors, control the invasives, replanting, breeding, reintroduction of fauna, flora, and then monitoring. That's all part of, or should be part of, a good action plan. And then the implementation of that plan. Let's do it. Let's get it going. Keep in mind timelines, budgets, monitoring, all those things are important. All that needs to be wrapped together into that bigger picture of a restoration plan if we hope that plan is successful. So the goal is to make sure our plan continues. Let me re-highlight this. I know we mentioned it, but I just really want to stress it. Let me get the red. Public support through education of the public is so very important. You may be working on this for the next 20 years. You retire, who's going to carry it? Who's going to pick up the ball and carry it forward? If you don't have the public behind it, the plan dies with you. What if you retire? What if you move? What if you quit your job? If this is going to be something that's going to persist, you got to have that public support, and you have to educate the public. That's why I can't stress it enough. You need to be able to talk like a scientist when you're in a room full of scientists. So you go to Emaquan and to those meetings, you talk like a scientist there. You go home, you go to your classes, you go to a city council meeting, and you're presenting an idea, you need to talk to the general public. So you need to switch how you communicate based on your audience. You need to educate the public about the value and the importance. You're not going to do that with a lot of heavy scientific terms and things that are going to be over their heads. Not that they're not smart people, but if they don't have the scientific background, they're not going to understand what you're trying to do. And it's going to be more difficult to get that public support unless we can educate them and convince them this is an important thing to do. All right, so again, make sure you guys use this when you're working on your restoration plans for class. All right, that's it. We're good.